Blood on the lace collar, the auction block, a pistol cocked in the dusty market square. The sound cut through Mabel's shame sharper than any blade. She flinched, but the gun wasn't meant for her, just some drunk cowboy settling a debt 3 stalls over. Still, she wished it had been. A bullet would have been kinder than this. Half the price of a steer, folks. Her father's voice boomed across the square, raw with whiskey and debt. She can cook, sew, and keep quiet. Anyone with enough coin can take her home tonight. Mabel's knees threatened to buckle. The spring wind whipped dust into her eyes, but she didn't dare wipe them. Tears would only make the beating worse. Around her, the citizens of Sweetwater gathered like vultures, men laughing, women whispering behind gloved hands, children peering from behind their mothers' skirts. 2 years. 2 years of marriage bed prayers, of bitter herbs that turned her stomach, of monthly disappointments marked in blood. 2 years before her husband dragged her from their bed, still in her nightdress, and threw her out like spoiled meat. His new bride had arrived that very morning, younger, louder, already boasting of the sons she'd bear. Anyone? Her father spat tobacco juice into the dirt. 22 years old, still got her teeth. Just faulty inside. The silence stretched like a hangman's rope. Then, footsteps. Heavy. Purposeful. The crowd parted. The man who emerged looked carved from the wilderness itself. Sawdust clung to his flannel shirt, tree sap stained his massive hands. A week's worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. When he lifted his head, his eyes weren't cruel, just bone-tired, like he'd been carrying the world since creation. Silas Mackenzie had buried his wife beneath the pines 3 winters back. 4 children, aged 3 to 10, waited at his cabin. The youngest still called for his mama in the night. He didn't haggle. Didn't speak. Just dropped the leather pouch on the table with enough weight to shut every mouth in the square. You sure? Mabel's father pocketed the coins greedily. She don't come with no refund. Silas looked at Mabel, then really looked. She saw something flicker in those storm-gray eyes. Not pity. Recognition, maybe. Like he knew what it meant to be hollowed out and left empty. She won't be judged anymore. His voice was low, certain as granite. Then he turned and walked away. Mabel stood frozen until her father shoved her forward. Go on then. You're his now. She grabbed her pathetic satchel, just worn shoes and her mother's locket, and followed the stranger who'd bought her like livestock. At the edge of town, his mule cart waited. He didn't help her up, just handed her a canteen when she'd settled in the bed. Long ride, he said. The water tasted of tin and endings. They rolled past fence posts leaning like broken men, past fields where nothing grew but death and sorrow. Mabel studied him sideways, this man who'd claimed her without appetite or anger. Why? The word escaped before she could catch it. Why'd you take me? For kids. He kept his eyes on the horizon. No mother. No time to find one the polite way. So she was hired help. Nothing more. I see. Just need someone who ain't cruel. That's enough. The cartwheels creaked over a dry creek bed. In her chest, something unclenched, just a little. He hadn't bought her for his bed or his pride. Maybe that was mercy enough. As the sun bled red across the prairie, painting their shadows long and strange, Mabel realized she'd been sold for less than cattle but might yet be worth more than either of them knew. The healing touched the cabin squatted between the pines like something wild that had learned to play house. No proper door, just a bare hide nailed over the frame. The porch sagged under the weight of neglect and sorrow. When Silas stopped the cart, 4 faces appeared at the window, suspicious as feral cats. "This is Miss Mabel," Silas announced, lifting the youngest boy with one massive arm. "She'll be staying." Little Benji buried his face in his father's neck. The others, Josiah, Eli, and Hannah, watched her like she might steal something. Or leave. Probably both. "Rooms upstairs," Silas said. "Water's in the bucket." The attic room was sparse but clean. Through the single window, endless pine forests stretched toward mountains that scraped the sky. Mabel sat on the narrow bed and let the tears come, quiet as snow. Morning arrived with burnt beans and bitter failure. The bread refused to rise. The children scattered when she moved too quick, gathered when she stood too still. Hannah clung to her father's legs like her life depended on it. Only Benji followed Mabel's shadow, thumb in his mouth, eyes wide with motherless wonder. She learned their language slowly. Josiah tested boundaries. Eli's anger was hunger in disguise. Hannah's silence was grief wearing pigtails. And Benji. Benji just needed someone to see him. Then came the night that changed everything. The storm hit like God's own fist. Wind screamed through the gaps in the walls. Hannah woke burning with fever, her small body shaking with chills that had nothing to do with cold. Silas stood helpless in the doorway, this man who could fell trees barehanded, reduced to nothing by a child's whimper. But Mabel moved like her mother had taught her, like the Apache woman who'd helped birth babies in her hometown. Willow bark tea. Cool cloths. Peppermint crushed between her palms and held beneath the girl's nose. She sang half-remembered lullabies and Lakota healing songs learned from the reservation doctor's wife, her voice growing stronger with each verse. Her hands never stopped, cooling, soothing, commanding the fever to break with a certainty she didn't feel but projected anyway. Dawn crept through the window to find Hannah's fever broken, the child mumbling about flapjacks. Silas hadn't moved from the doorway. He stared at Mabel like she'd performed a resurrection. "Thank you." The words seemed torn from somewhere deep. That morning, a steaming mug waited on the table. Beside it, a note in careful script, "Thank you." No signature, but Mabel knew. She cradled the pine needle tea and felt something crack open in her chest, not breaking, but making room. Maple. Benji toddled over that afternoon, arms raised high. She froze. Then smiled. Then lifted him up and let him wind his sticky fingers in her hair. Spring crept into the valley on cautious feet. Mabel taught letters with charcoal on planks, showed Hannah how French braids could tame wild hair, helped the boys track deer signs the way an old Cheyenne man had shown her father. They stopped calling her Miss Mabel. She became Miss May, then just May, then, "Don't cry, Mama." The word hit her like lightning. Caleb, laid out on the kitchen table with his leg sliced open from the axe, reached out with one small hand to touch her tears. "You make the best biscuits," he whispered through gritted teeth. "You sing soft like my real mama used to." The other children gathered close as she stitched him up with hands that shook but never faltered. When it was done, when Caleb slept peaceful with his leg elevated, the children pressed close. "Papa says you're staying," Hannah whispered. "Does that mean you're our mama now?" Mabel could only nod, throat too full of unexpected grace. That night, Silas found her on the porch. Stars wheeled overhead like promises written in light. "I ain't good with words," he began. "You say enough. Thought I was giving you a way out. Never thought I had the right to keep you." She turned to face him fully. "I'm not going anywhere." "Why?" "Because love isn't being chosen at first sight. It's being chosen again after folks see who you really are." He pulled her close then, gentle as breathing. Inside the cabin, children slept peaceful. Outside, the pines whispered secrets. And between them, something holy took root. Two women at the trading post. The general store smelled of pickle brine and gun oil. Mabel stepped into the shade while Silas waited for supplies, grateful to escape the noon heat. She'd made it 3 steps before the voice cut through her peace like a rusty blade. Well, if it ain't the Baron Ghost herself. Margaret Holstead, former mother-in-law, current purveyor of misery, stood by the fabric bolts, fanning herself with practiced superiority. Beside her, the new wife preened in store-bought lace, one hand curved protective over her still flat belly. That's her. The girl's voice carried clear to the pickle barrel. The one who couldn't. Pretty but cursed. Margaret's smile could have curdled cream. Couldn't give us even a squalling pup. Dry as August dirt. Well, I will. The girl's chin lifted. A big, healthy boy. Already picked his name, Samuel, for his grandfather. Unlike her, Margaret added, loud enough for the Cherokee woman buying flour to flinch, useless as a cracked jar. Mabel's hands fisted in her skirts. 2 years of silence pressed against her teeth, begging for release. But what was the point? Words wouldn't fill her empty womb, wouldn't erase the shame that had driven her to the auction block. A hand touched her shoulder. Warm. Steady. Silas. He materialized from the storeroom shadows, still dusty from loading grain. His eyes swept over the two women like a winter wind counting casualties. She's the only one who can get my daughter to sleep. His voice carried that particular frontier quiet that preceded violence. The only one who taught Benji not to throw stones. The only one who makes our house feel like it has a roof. Margaret's fan stilled. The girl's hand dropped from her belly. Silas guided Mabel toward the door, but she turned back, spine straight as a rifle barrel. I remember the day you let your mother spit on me, she told her former husband's shadow in the corner. The day you threw me out like spoiled meat because my body couldn't do what yours couldn't either. Thomas Holstead stepped from behind the coffee grinder, head crushed between nervous hands. Mabel, I have 4 children who hug me when I wake up. Her voice didn't shake now. I have a man who never asks what I cannot give, only what I want to share. My house is full of warmth, of laughter, of choosing each other every damn day. She paused, tasting the truth of it. I'd rather sweep ashes for Silas than sit in your parlor like a porcelain trophy. The store had gone cemetery quiet. Even the flies seemed to hold their breath. Thomas opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again like a landed fish. Mabel walked out into the blazing sun. Silas followed, carrying his sack of rice and something heavier, the weight of witnessed truth. They rode home in companionable silence. But that night, after the children slept, she made a wreath from prairie asters that bloomed despite the drought. Just needed to make something beautiful with her own hands. The whisper started 2 months later. The new wife's belly stayed flat as a hymnal. Desperation drove her to dangerous choices, padding beneath her dresses, mysterious trips to the Mexican curandero, lies that multiplied like locusts. Thomas discovered the deception when she tried to buy an orphan infant from a traveling family. The scandal rocked Sweetwater harder than any tornado. Within a week, she was gone, Thomas aged 10 years overnight, and the big house stood empty as Mabel's womb had been. Heard Thomas is looking to sell, Silas mentioned one evening, casual as discussing weather. Good land out there, Mabel agreed, equally casual. Might grow something worthwhile with the right hands. He smiled slow. Reckon it might. They bought it for half its worth and turned it into the finest horse ranch the territory had ever seen. But that's a story for another night. When the earth turned to stone 7 weeks without rain, the land cracked like old leather, showing its bones. Creek beds turned to dust highways where rattlesnakes sought shade. The corn gave up first, stalks rattling death songs in the wind. Then the beans. Then hope itself, withering under a sun that had forgotten mercy. Silas came home later each night, shoulders bent under invisible weight. He'd take his supper on the porch, staring at cloudless skies like they'd personally betrayed him. The children learned to count potatoes, to make 1 egg feed 4 mouths, to stop asking for seconds. But Mabel had been sold for less than cattle. She'd survived worse than drought. Before dawn, while the house slept, she gathered every vessel that could hold water. Buckets, pots, even Hannah's old wash basin. She hauled water from the deepest well until her shoulders screamed, then wrapped her hands in torn petticoats and went to war with the earth. The ground fought back, hard as gravestone. Didn't matter. She broke it anyway, 1 stubborn inch at a time. When the sun climbed high enough to blister, she draped wet cloth over the seedlings like a mother shielding babies. "Fool's work," muttered Jackson, the hired hand. "Nothing grows in hell." "Then I'll plant in purgatory," Mabel shot back, dirt under her nails like war paint. She sang to those plants, old songs her grandmother knew, pony-growing songs learned from a woman at the reservation, even hymns when nothing else came. Watered them with sweat and stubbornness. When aphids attacked, she mixed pepper and soap like a witch brewing vengeance. The day Silas collapsed, she caught him before his knees hit dirt. Fever ate at him for 3 days. She spooned broth between his cracked lips, bathed him with precious water, told stories of green places that might exist again. "Mabel," he muttered through delirium, fingers clutching air. "Don't leave. Not you too." "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered against his burning forehead. "Not when I'm needed. And here, I'm needed." The fever broke with dawn. When his eyes cleared, she was there, hair wild, dress stained, hands raw from the hoe. "You look like hell," he croaked. "You should see yourself." He tried to smile. Failed. "The land's dying." "No." She helped him sit up, gentle but firm. "It's waiting. There's a difference." That afternoon, Eli burst through the door. "Ma, there's a tomato." 1 tomato. Red as blood, stubborn as love, clinging to its vine like a promise. The whole family stood around it, silent as church. "How?" Silas asked. Mabel smiled. "You taught me, not everything worth keeping comes easy." They shared that tomato 6 ways, sliced thin as communion wafers. Best thing any of them had ever tasted. 2 weeks later, the beans followed. Then squash. Then peppers hot enough to make the devil sweat. Not a bounty, not yet, but enough. Enough to trade, enough to hope, enough to prove that some things grow stronger in hard ground. "My hands ain't pretty anymore," Mabel said one evening, studying the calluses and scars. Silas caught those hands, kissed each roughened knuckle. "They're beautiful. They're busy making miracles." The drought broke in September with a storm that shook the rafters. The family stood on the porch, faces turned skyward, mouths open to catch the rain. Mabel wept without shame, and Silas held her while the earth drank deep. "I don't have much," he said against her hair. "This land fights me, my strength fades. All I got is this place, these kids, and you. Then that's more than enough." She pulled back to meet his eyes. "Before you, I had a name no one wanted to say. Now I have a garden that remembers my hands, children who call me home, and a man who asks me to stay even in drought. Thunder rolled across the valley like applause. In the garden, shoots pushed through mud, reaching for tomorrow. You never needed rain to grow something beautiful, Silas said. And standing there, water streaming down their faces, they both knew it was true. The garden that wouldn't die. The government men arrived on a Tuesday, boots polished bright as their promises. They spread maps across Silas's kitchen table like they owned the future drawn in surveyor's ink. Railways coming through, the lead man announced. Right across this ridge. We'll pay good money, enough to set your family up proper in town. Mabel stood beside Silas, flour still dusting her apron from the morning's bread. Through the window, she could see her garden, no longer just stubborn vegetables but a wild sprawl of life. Sunflowers tall as horses. Tomatoes heavy on the vine. Corn reaching skyward like prayers finally answered. Think what you could give your children, the man pressed. Real schooling. Store-bought clothes. A house that don't lean with the wind. Silas's eyes never left the garden. He saw more than plants. He saw Mabel singing over seedlings in drought, his children learning to read by moonlight, the fence he'd built with Thomas after the boy called him Papa for the first time. No. The word dropped like a stone in still water. Mr. Mackenzie, perhaps you don't understand, I understand plenty. Silas stood, all 6 feet of him unfolding slow and certain. This land ain't for sale. Not for railways, not for gold, not for all the promises you got inked on those maps. After they left, muttering about progress and stubborn fools, Silas and Mabel hammered a sign at the road's edge, not for sale. Someone was once allowed to stay here. That is enough. Years flowed like honey after that. The children grew tall, married, brought home grandchildren who learned to walk between tomato stakes. The house expanded, a room here, a porch there, until it sprawled comfortable as an old dog in the sun. Mabel's garden became legend. During the bad drought of 78, it fed half the county. When spotted fever took the Hendersons' parents, their kids knew to come to Mabel's door. She never turned anyone away. Never asked what they couldn't give. Just opened her arms and her garden, white as grace. One autumn afternoon, a grandson, Silas III, they called him, tugged on his grandfather's sleeve. "Grandpa, why don't you call it just Mabel's garden?" Old Silas led the boy to the garden gate. Above it, carved in cedar that would outlast them all, were the words, "She didn't bear my blood, but she gave birth to the rest of my life." "What's that mean?" the boy asked. "Means your grandma grew more than vegetables." Silas's voice was rough with years and love. "She grew us into a family. Grew me into a man worth being. Grew hope in ground everyone said was dead." Mabel passed on a Tuesday, same as those government men had come. When peaceful in her sleep, one hand stretched toward the window overlooking her garden. They buried her beneath the old cottonwood, where she'd hung wind chimes that sang in every breeze. On her stone, Silas carved, "Here grew everything she was never given, and all that she gave anyway." He sat by that grave each morning, telling her about the new colts, the grandchildren's mischief, the tomatoes coming in redder than ever. One morning, he didn't come back. They found him peaceful, face turned toward her stone. They buried him beside her. The garden never stopped growing. Years later, when the railroad finally came through, it curved respectful around that hill. Engineers scratched their heads, the straight path was easier. But something about that sign, that garden, that story of a woman sold for less than cattle who grew into something priceless, made even progress step aside. Travelers still stop sometimes, reading that sign in the sunset light, not for sale. Because some ground is too holy for commerce. Some love too deep for contracts. And in the garden that wouldn't die, the sunflowers still reach for heaven, remembering the woman who taught them how.